Good evening, everybody, and greetings from Finland. I have the pleasure to introduce Miss Nur Saad. She's an architect and landscape architect coming from Palestine, Israel, that region. Graduated for the both degrees in Technion. One must say, I guess, the leading university in the region, but I think the history of Technion itself sort of speaks for itself. It's at least one of the main campuses is based in Haifa, but it's set or founded under the Ottoman rule. And it has a very, very strong resistance and resilience when it comes to academic excellence with Ottoman, with the British rule, and now with Israel. But it's a very, very strong university, sort of like one of the home places of Nobel laureates. And I find it very interesting that Miss Saad is from there and supported by Technion because her works are somehow controversial, at least from a viewpoint of, let's see, looking from Finland and reading the normal news about, for example, Israel and Palestine. Personally, I met the landscape architect Nur Saad in 2015 in Tartu, Estonia, where it was there was a conference of sort of European architecture schools or education, and she was specially invited to present her work on Bedouin urbanism, or what she called Bedouin city, and following this, like the first thing what came to my mind is International Society of Biourbanism, because this work from Miss Nur Saad's point of view was like describing very clearly some points from a little bit different direction what we at the society are taking forward. Briefly, what I got from the Bedouin city is that some of the Bedouin tribes in North Negev, I guess, the desert, has been like moved around by the different kinds of colonial powers, and but still they have this very strong resistance due to their nomadic or semi-nomadic culture and fundamental understanding of the organic knowledge of the site, the desert itself, and communicating with nature. And based on that, of course, they take any kind of urbanism or architectural intervention as something maybe slightly cheaper. So like if you which can never like compete with their fundamental understanding of desert and being there on the site. And like then at some points of this colonial circulations, also I believe the government of Israel was providing them with urban infrastructure, sewage systems and such, and try to get them into one place and accept this kind of development. But their like resistance and local knowledge was so strong that they managed to tune even this kind of given general urbanism into some kind of like a urban nomad city, and kind of unofficial or quite much unofficial not very much recognized, and this is where landscape architect Nur Saad stepped in and start like communicating with the Bedouins and developing methodology of communicative design in landscape architectural or bio-urban form, and then producing the work that was shown in Tartu as well. And then we start talking. I got interested in this level of thinking. And then she continued, and for some reason graduated also as an architect. So as Stefano Serafini states, she is double guilty. And then I was curious, like, okay, if this lady steps into architecture, like, can she still be in touch with this sensitiveness and ability of communicating with, let's say, collective subconscious, like with the Bedouins. And this time with her thesis of architecture, it was like, again, very radical, maybe a little bit more from political side, dealing with the neighborhood in Jerusalem, Palestine neighborhood, and which is disconnected to other Palestine Authority or territories at least, and in which they had been brewing a very special kind of like urban resistance, which is somehow based on local knowledge and very strong community senses, some kind of like constructive anarchy and organic understanding, ending up in an open form, which is all the time changing. And this has been so strong and so like intelligent in a way, organic enough that it's competing with this very respectable powers of Israeli surveillance, for example, and how they want to dominate the site. And without any kind of aggression or like political aggression or anything, Miss Nur Saad again like was able to hook up with this collective conscious or collective subconscious of this urban settlement, and they let her in, and so she was able to start recording like what's going really inside the guts of this kind of urbanism, and then transforming that into an architectonic language. And I guess this is what we are listening today. I think that's more or less from my side, and maybe now we should give the floor to Ms. Nur Saad.
Thank you, Marco. So Nur, it's up to you.
Okay, let me share the presentation. Thank you, Marco, for the introduction and presenting me to our listeners. I'm just making sure that I can also read the text and show you the presentation. So are you seeing the presentation, or just making sure that you know?
The presentation is visible. Yes, we can see it.
It's not full screen.
Just a moment. Is it now full screen? I'm sorry for this.
Yes, yes.
question.
Okay. Okay. So al-ʿİsawiyya elements, place project starting from a place. I picked al-ʿİsawiyya to start. Usually we look for an issue or a research to start, but I decided to start from al-ʿİsawiyya, a 9 years old neighborhood located in Jerusalem. Here you can see it near to the old city. It was ruled by different countries, and in 1967 became a neighborhood in Jerusalem, ruled both by Palestinian and Israeli. 1,055 dunam, 15,000 citizens. The people are mostly Muslim, religious, and here you can see some of the workspaces for them: groceries, garage, and the fast food place. The open space in al-ʿİsawiyya the public space is divided into two: the public space, the public building, which you can see mostly are mosques, schools, kindergarten, and community building. The community building is located nearby the cemetery, and here you can see a glimpse of it in use. And the open public spaces, which are temporary open public spaces, they are not built yet. al-ʿİsawiyya was never planned. Therefore, it's easy to take it to the architecture without architects case, but it's not. I think there are 4 architects in al-ʿİsawiyya that it was developed through these 4 forces, 4 powers that I'm going to present for you now. There's the militarism. Here you can see 3 different typical events which occur frequently in al-ʿİsawiyya: demolishing building without permit, breaking into school, and a resident detention. The second force is the urban context. It is located and trapped in between the road, the main road, the hospital, and the French Hill around it, which I think that made it impossible to grow. And also the army forces sometimes closes the entrance in the al-ʿİsawiyya, and now you can see the traffic it poses. It's trapped, and also because of the futural plans that limitates the development of al-ʿİsawiyya. It's a ghetto. The third force, it's the tribal system. The people there are pitching between the clan collective affiliation and the individualism. In one way, it's preserved the cultural structure of al-ʿİsawiyya, and in the other way, it's hard to sell the land and go from there. The fourth power is the topography. You can see it easily in the pictures, the floor differences, the crazy slopes that goes to 50%. Sometimes it's really hard to go from a place to another. As a responsive to these kind of slopes, you can see all the retaining walls, which we are looking at right now. And also you can see it in the facade of the neighborhood. These 4 forces, the combination of the four focuses create a barrier in the urban development of the neighborhood and emphasizes the accessibility and the security in the daily used public space. In 2014, the Biennale Rampula showed us the element of architecture focused on the fragment of rich, complex architecture collage. The elements were a reference for this project that led to the identification of the same elements, but in a new role. Rooftops, stairs, courtyards, and balconies are only some of the elements that hold the spatial in a transformation into new use, which success to access the serve the needs of the local residents. A number of creative ideas for spatial solution were created by local. These reflexive solution formed new fundamental architecture elements in the individual space. New fundamental elements in the individual space. I'm going to show you some of these responsive solutions. The basketball court becomes an improviser prayer place. The streets of the neighborhood serve as a playground for the children of al-ʿīsawiyya. Balconies, which serves as a backyard parking lot. As you can notice, the recence of the balcony in al-ʿīsawiyya facade. It's a street in the sky, and also a view of the streets and the soldier during the various daytime hours. For the soldiers, the roof was the view of the residents of the neighborhood. The four forces that shaped the neighborhood led the resident reaction to the new use of the elements, each in his lot. I see the whole neighborhood as one, connecting these elements for creating an accessible and protected alternative public space. Here's a section that also show you my vision and how I can see the whole al-ʿīsawiyya connected by these elements and rejoining them to get to this urban space. Here you saw the studying of the topography of al-ʿīsawiyya and cutting each time in different elevation, and that helped me see which building we are cutting to get to this safety and accessible floor. This part of the neighborhood is the case study I chose, a part that introduced two levels, the religion floor and the educational floor. The first step was a continuation of identification of the elements in the neighborhood. Second step was mapping and converting potential private spaces and structural elements that were the same as the public education floor. You can see it, the studies through the sketches, mapping the public spaces that we can use from the houses as well. An alternative public floor is obtained, connecting the daily activities through the element, using and converting the chosen parts of the private houses into the continuous public floor. The connection between the religious and educational floor, you can see it here on the right, and something that integrate in the built area. I'll elaborate on the educational floor. In gray, existing buildings that connect the same heights at the second floor of the school. Connecting between them using the elements. Creatively, in the use of element, meditating between the various private and public spaces creates a new alternative safe space, a system that changes the relationship in using the space. The size of the safe space under functional varies depending on their distance from school, gently integrating in the built area of the neighborhood. This alternative safe public space gives the child a safe daily path from his own house, walking all the way using the educational floor. In case there is a dangerous situation, this child can go into the next house and feel safe. In addition, this floor overcomes the problem of topography steep slope, creates an accessible and continuous path. The residence solution, which for me were a source of inspiration and engine, a tool to operate in the space, made it possible to identify the potential of the elements. Using the potential elements to mediate between the various spaces in order to cope with the varies and improve their daily life. An improvement that produces a dynamic system that knows how to adapt itself to the ever-changing needs of the residents. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nur. Congratulations for the beautiful graphics also. And they sustain this. I mean, for us who are not architects, as many of you know, I'm not an architect, even if I work with this terrible group of people that are architects since more than 15 years. It's difficult to follow these images, but they're very, very impressive, very beautiful, I would say. So I will give voice now to our discuss. What?
I'd like to thank Gaby, Ronnen, and Fatina for being and helping and providing this project.
Professor Schwartz. Yeah, yes. I think he must be a pretty smart guy, I guess, to have a student like you. Yeah, I guess so. And thank you, Professor Schwartz, for being here, actually. So I will keep going now with the discussants. So we have, of course, Marco, if he has something to add, Matthew, Damiano, Rob, Yeter, and Nili Harag. I don't know who wants to say something first. I will start with Robert. So if I may, Rob Neuwirth is a scholar. I mean, he's not a scholar in the traditional terms. He's not an academic in the strict term of the sense, and this is a good point. I would say something that make him superior to all of us. And Rob is a very interesting writer. He had this long experience of traveling and visiting city of squatters all over the world. So I think some vibes should touch his heart when looking at these images. And so I wonder what he thinks about that.
Well, thank you, Stefano. I'm also not an architect, so I can't plead guilty to that. But first of all, congratulations, Nur, on this great presentation and very fertile idea or set of ideas for a possible intervention in the community. It struck me, you know, I don't know what the sort of land control and ownership of the community is, but it reminded me of what a Brazilian architect was once explaining to me about the favelas in Rio, which is that the becos, what they call pathways that wind up the hills in Rio, are in some sense they're public areas. They're just linear plazas. And the way that you've elegantly, basically applied that concept to the upper stories and the balconies and connecting the balconies and walkways in some way to create a pathway through the community and a safe pathway through the community, I think is a tremendous similarity to what the squatters, what the favelados in Brazil have also done. So I would, I think there are tremendous similarities here, although obviously the major difference is the militarized presence from outside, which provides there is a policing military presence in the favelas in Brazil, but it's a different kind of presence than the occupying and punitive force that the Israeli military, the IDF, brings to whatever interactions it has with the community. I think there's a tremendous amount of intersectionality and cross-pollination here. I had a question that I was trying to understand, not having been to Jerusalem, and maybe it's a very simple question, and maybe you can answer. The community seems to be walled in, that it has walls all around it. Is this a correct understanding on my part?
You mean there's a wall that separates the neighborhood from
the rest of the city?
No, but it's easily controlled by the army because there are just 4 entrances from different sides of the neighborhood. So in case they can easily control the neighborhood.
Okay, and what is, since there are only 4 entrances, what else is the barrier? It's buildings?
Barriers are the forces that control the neighborhood. I mean, it's the military, it's the topography, and the very hard slopes that you need to go from a place to another, and you are really, you don't feel it's accessible and safe. And and the tribal system, which I said, it's on one hand, it's preserve the cultural structure of this neighborhood, and on the other hand, it makes it hard to sell the land because you don't want to live in the middle of I don't know, family.
Right, someone else's
Yes.
domain. Yes,
Yes.
I understand.
And the 4th was the urban context, because it's trapped, as I said. There's the road 1 and there is the French Hill, and you can't build to anywhere. I mean, you just trapped in this neighborhood.
Right. So, I mean, that strikes me as also very similar to many of the shanty towns that I've been in, where their boundaries are hard, and because the built environment of the rest of society. I'm wondering, in the situation in Brazil and many of the other, in Kenya, in Nigeria, and many of the other places I've been, there's a porousness because people work outside, even though they live inside. And does that exist in this community at all, or is it much more self-contained?
As I've said, some of the residents work inside al-ʿİsawiyya. They have small groceries and different kind of small businesses, I'd say, and some of them work in Jerusalem.
And so they have to go through security to get in and out.
It's this neighborhood, it's part of Jerusalem, unlike other Palestinian neighbors. I mean, you don't have to go through checkpoint or, but still it's it has a soldier around all the time, and there's a military base located on one of the hills. But it's not like the other Palestinian neighborhoods.
No, thank you for explaining, and please
It
excuse my.
means that there is the military, the hospitals and schools are for the Palestinian authorities, and the IDC, I mean the military and but I think you mean you understand what I'm saying, that the hospitals and the schools are for the Palestinians, and the military is ruling the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I understand. I just think that there's a tremendous amount of I mean, I could see, for instance, the favelas in Sao Paulo, which share some of the topographical issues that you've brought up, learning from your presentation to be able to understand how they can reallocate space within their communities to create shared space, which will also create economic opportunity, because along those shared spaces could be more stores and groceries and other kinds of businesses catering to the community. So I think it's an extremely fertile project, and I want to congratulate you, and also to you know, for me, it brings up all sorts of issues about. I write about basically informal communities and economic structures, and it brings up all sorts of issues about how these communities can develop themselves. So I really thank you for that.
Yeah, I want to ask, oh, go ahead, please.
Jump in if that's all right.
Can say something? Can I talk?
Yeah, I want to ask Nili Arag,
Okay.
because she's actually currently working now in the same area, isn't it, Nili?
Yes, but I would start perhaps just to clarify a few things regarding the spatial, I would say, situation of İzleme in general. And I think it's important, since the Marco, the guy from Finland, the professor from Finland, was mentioning about the Ottoman and the British mandate. Actually, the whole area within 1948 was actually kind of an enclave, and at that time, İzleme was also within the enclave of the Green Line, which was the division, the partition of the land. But I want to take it a little bit further, and actually, I've seen the project. I've been in the presentation of Nur in the Technion. I remember, you remember Nur? Nur did not remember, but I was there. And I think it's a very nice project for sure. Although I'm coming from the other school, I'm from the Betzalel in Jerusalem. It's interesting first to say that we in Jerusalem don't deal so much with the political issues of Jerusalem, I would say, at least in ours. I don't know why, but this is something for psychological research, why the people who are so close to the issues don't actually deal with it, or not recommended to deal with it. But this is another thing. I would like to take the special situation of İzleme, mainly the topography, and actually the idea that the four routes or the four entrances could be actually blocked whenever they want. So actually, İzleme is still an enclave de facto. But what I haven't heard, which I think is crucial to understand the situation, is that after 1967, when Israel, how can I say, conquered or used the right term, or confiscated or took over East Jerusalem, actually in the early 70s, I think about 2/3 of İzleme is actually appropriated by the government. And actually, this is a line that does not appear on any of the mappings that Nur actually showed. And it's true, because actually you don't know about the appropriation. We now needed it to get to our work to know where it goes. And it was almost like a top secret. But we got it and we know it. And I think that means that a big chunk of İzleme is actually been taken off, and it's vacant because the residents cannot build on that part. And that makes the other part very, very dense. And I'm not speaking about the idea of ownership, which I think is a terrible situation, because once these lots are not recognized and not registered, you cannot actually identify if you own or not. And then it's become another issue. How do you prove it actually belongs to you or to your family, which is the government, or at least that government at the moment, is trying to put lots of problems about that issue. But I'm trying to say that the biggest thing is, how can we densify İzlame at the moment? And not only densify to provide housing, but how can we provide them with places to work? Places to work that they will benefit from the land like it happens everywhere else in the country. And actually, I would say in parentheses, don't judge me for being right wing, or the how can I say, the holding the talks for the government. But I would say, surprisingly enough, for the last 3 or 4 years, the government actually put quite a lot of money to start building or designing employment in few places in East Jerusalem. It's the Office for Jerusalem, with the idea, I would say, let's design for them, they will work and they will not cause us problems. It will be quiet. People work, don't make, when the economy gets better, it's more politically quiet and no confrontation. But I think it's interesting to look at the mechanics of occupations that is in one hand limiting, and in the other hand providing tools for design, which I would say we are doing in another few offices in East Jerusalem, to ease the situation of the people. So it's like a Janus phase, the state of Israel is like a Janus, in one hand occupying and limiting, and the police or the border police is there, and in the other end providing something for the people to do. But what is extremely interesting to understand when you're looking at the whole space, the open space over there, but this is typical because it happens in quite a few places in Jerusalem. The neighborhoods never meets. It means the French Hill, which basically is on the neighborhood is on the land of a confiscated Palestinian land, is never meeting İzlame. There always a liminal space in between, not to create friction, or at least not to pass the Israeli, I would say, psychological barrier of meeting together. I would say it's inevitable, and actually the liminal space will one day get filled up, because there is a tension and a need on the space to build. How do we do it? It's basically the same tactic, and this when I want to come back to the project of Nur, the same tactic, the tactic of finding safe places will be the same way of creating more housing and actually developing. And I think we have to see the situation. How do we allow İzlame as a representation of most places, so most neighborhoods in East Jerusalem to develop, but still keep the characteristic of the village? Because what happens, many places that develop and develop and develop, and it loses or forgets what it actually was, the idea of a Palestinian village. And I think this is very important to remember. To remember that people want to keep their own identity, and to keep their own identity in space and the representation of space. So this was my main issue. I have to say, once I talked to know today. I was very, just to say it, because we in this discussion are also not so, how to say, empathic to our counterpart, to the Muslim students, professional, whatever, because I try to invite few people. And now it's the Ramadan, and it's this time, it's 7 o'clock Israel time. It's when the sun goes down. And this is the iftar. This is the time when they break the fast. So perhaps it's a little bit sad we did it on that time because we could not invite, or you could not invite, I'm not inviting other people to take part in it because there was pretty much interest for more people to be here, but they could not. But thank you very much, Nur.
That's my bad for the time organizing this meeting. We had a lot of confusion without considering CET, etc., etc. So sorry for that. That's a good point. Matt wanted to say something. I just wanted to stress one thing. I think we started visiting. As many of you know, I live in Artena. Artena is now the place where the International Society of Biourbanism is established since many years. Artena is this little village in central Italy that has many characteristics, very similar to, in a way, also to al-ʿīsawiyya and to the place that Rob was talking about. So it's very ancient, has been built in the 13th century, but the characteristic that it has is that of the village. And we are facing the same issue, even if a different way, but the main issue is the disappearance of the identity of the village, what Nili was talking about. Is very relevant. There are forces that push for making this place a kind of a protection place where people hide from a kind of modernity that wants to strip them away from their identity, and vice versa. There is a push to modernize this place and transforming that in a normal city in a way. So especially the kind of we have this issue in a very light Italian way. It's called tourism. So tourism comes and transforms this place in a kind of Disneyland, typically. Nearly the next issue of Journal by Urbanism will be devoted to the god Janus that you were quoting before. So I think you will find it very interesting because there are many things that you are talking about. We are thinking about that. Matthew, I think you wanted to say something, and you look at from a different perspective, the perspective of a geographer.
Yeah, Nur, I just wanted to say this is a wonderful project and a very needed project. Yeah, my background is I am an architect, but I'm also an urban geographer, so I can both appreciate the architecture, but also kind of come at it from an urban geography approach. And I just wanted to kind of pull forward, I think there's a really important frame that you've established, that a lot of the discussion around safe space is it's a defined space or it's a destination. You know, within organizing, we need to create these safe spaces. But I very much appreciate, I think you call it the daily path, right? So your proposal is not a safe space as defined by boundaries. It is the daily existence in the urbanism should be safe. And I think that's actually a really provocative place to say that it's not a thing, it's not a destination. You're advocating for everyday life to be the safe space. And I think that's really powerful. And I think it's a really, in some ways, an aggressive take. And I think that's my experience of discussions around safe space. That's usually not how it's framed. And I would encourage you to just continue to kind of, and I think it comes across in your representation, right? The red is always continuous, right? You've never, at least I didn't think I saw any discontinuity in the red through the city as you were representing. So I think it's there, and I would maybe encourage you to bring that forward a little bit more, because I think that's really a powerful part of your message. And I guess the other kind of aspect, a lot of my research for the last year has been around food access and food systems around health. Obviously with COVID, I've been studying kind of daily food access in Seattle through various regulations with the pandemic. And I'm interested to see your four forces are system, or what I would say systems, right? Military, urban context, tribal, cultural, and topography. But your response is at the scale of the body, right? And I think, is that intentional? Do you think that's the place we should work at, is at the scale of the body? Or is that coincidence? I would be curious. It seems like you're using, that's the important scale to you, is the scale of the body relative to the four forces. So is it intentional or coincidental from your perspective? That's kind of, I'd love to hear more about that, Nur.
Sorry, to make sure I did understand your question, you mean that the solution is, I was talking about that everybody has a solution is in his own home / lot. And I was talking about looking at the neighborhood as one, and everybody will give a part of his space for the whole community. And I see, as you said, the red lines that continue all over. It's right, because I was talking about making an accessible and safe place. And by that, I do look at my kind of work was cutting a level and seeing which houses can connect to that and try to add more spaces in between and connecting them using the elements. And by that, I can provide more spaces that are not in the school, or, you know, adding some places and spaces for the residents so they can use. And by that, we can connect all of them. I hope it's clear now for you.
Great, that's a good clarification. So kind of the room scale. Okay, great. No, I think this, and this idea of the liminal, like connecting through the liminal, building off of Nili's kind of statement, is how does that safe, how can we use thinking about safe spaces to connect through, right? As opposed to how we get to. That, I mean, I think that's kind of the first response and kind of the first things that I drew from your thinking.
I have a question to Yeter Tan. She's a Kurdish, and she has a lot of experience in a way that connect to the space that Nur is talking about. I'm interested especially from the point of view of self-organization and management of space. So what is your impression, Yeter, about this work?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much, Nur, for this great presentation.
We cannot hear you very well. Can you put microphone closer, Yeter, please?
Okay, do you hear me right now? Okay, thank you, Nur, for this great presentation and the graphs that you provide for us. Actually, there are some similarities between architecture style or using space of Kurdish people and also residents of al-ʿİsawiyya. The graphs you provided and also al-ʿİsawiyya remind me architecture style of Sur, that is a city in Kurdistan. Of course, not just architecture, there are many similarities between those cities, such as expropriation, dispossession, etc. But I wondered that you mentioned about streets is a place for children to spend time or play. It is also very important for children and Kurdish women to socialize, spend time, or come together. I mean, street is an important part of Kurdish people's life to maintain their culture, live their identity, and actually being a community. It's part of being a community. I mean, for a community, streets, even balconies or buildings are not only construction to live, they are part of life and represent a lifestyle. And you also mentioned about alternative safe space. I really wonder that what kind of alternative safe space that residents of al-ʿİsawiyya have, or what does alternative safe space mean for them?
It means that your child can go from your house to the school without facing the problems. As I said, the forces I was talking about, it's whether the slopes, the dangerous slopes on a rainy day, it's, you know, everything that can make it dangerous for the people that are walking through the neighborhood. It can be, as I said, several army going in the neighborhood, and your child might face some fear, or the dangerous slopes. You can face it in different spaces in the neighborhood, and the solution I was presenting is making using the elements to build a safe level. I call it the educational level. It's it's the public space where you can go from the school back home without facing any fear. I mean, it's also accessible and safe. That was the idea of this alternative safe place.
Thank you.
Damiano, you are the last but not the least, because I think that was my crazy idea. I don't know if it works, but you know, Damiano makes a lot of research about the morphology of the movement of people into cities, so how people use the city. So I don't know if Damiano was worried that I would ask that for a kind of collaboration possibly between the spin unit and Nur Saad in this project, because it would be super exciting. So I don't know. This is my question, but of course you have your observation, so go ahead, freely.
Yeah, thank you, Stefano. I think it was quite nice to be here and to look at Nur's work. I find it quite inspiring because I've been working with Terraform. I don't know if you know the office, but it was kind of a Michael Sorkin project. It was called Open Gaza. It was kind of a book that we worked on for almost like 10 years, I guess. And I found quite interesting Nur's work, I think, because like we've been working on the kind of a very planning level. So we've been trying to understand kind of how can we legitimize the Gaza Strip and of course all the Palestinians living in Jerusalem, and kind of how can we picture this as a wholeness? How can we look at this as a ring city? So how can we bring together Jerusalem with the Gaza Strip? But I think what I really liked of your work is that exactly like also like Matthew said, is kind of a continuity. And I would be indeed very curious to know kind of how do we, I wouldn't say implement it, but kind of how do you think that such a project could actually be implemented kind of in place? Like what could be the relationship that has to be built with the local communities, or what sort of let's say what sort of a normative structure you will need to make this happen? Like I'm just curious to know if you thought about that. And
well, I will have to explain the idea for people, and because I was saying that they will need to give up some of their private spaces, the balcony, the roof, the stairs, and for the good. I mean, this kind of plan needs everybody to collaborate, understand, and have the will to give. And that I'm sure it's gonna be not an easy mission, but I think understanding it will help everybody want to share, and to know that, okay, if it's for our children to go through this path to school and back home, I think many people would want to do that. I didn't really go further than that. I mean, it was my final project in architecture, and maybe one day I can make it work and build this thing. But I think we have some good points about it, and one of it is the maintenance and the elements we're talking about, and it's something that can grow and be fragmental. I mean, you can add these elements and decrease them to get to the goal or to the path you want, to the daily path, that it might change. And in this, I think the biourbanism, I think this is the network we're talking about that can grow further and generate itself in this complex.
Yeah, I think that indeed is kind of an interesting path to undertake, because I remember when I don't know much about Jerusalem, of course, because I was studying mostly and working in Gaza, but I think what was interesting for me the most, it was indeed this kind of a community, kind of how the community was constantly building and rebuilding their environment, because of course we were witnessing bombing kind of on the daily basis or weekly basis, and kind of the speed at which the community could come together and rebuild this space and make it public again. So I think that this kind of course, both community but also psychological strength to come back together and create a living space out of the gravel. I think that was it was something quite amazing to kind of to map as well in cities. And I think that indeed, if you think of seeing kind of a, let's call it private space being pulled together into a kind of a linear public space, I would say that this is not impossible. Actually, this is actually quite something that happens kind of rather often in that community, and it's most likely possible to organize as well. So I find it quite interesting, because it seems that it is operable. It is something possible to be made.
Very good. So I ask if there is somebody in the public want to put questions, because we are a lot. So I said, if you want to put down in the chat some questions, so we can go ahead with a little discussion, even if it's already 1 hour, I think a well spent hour. I'm very grateful to all the participants for that. Many ideas come to my mind about this work, and I hope this is just the beginning of a process go together. So I would like to see Professor Arag and Professor Schwartz and Dr. Ben Arie to collaborate somehow. It would be very interesting, possibly with this biourbanist bridge, if it can be helpful. There are so many aspects that could be, studied more, and this connection between different worlds. So what I see here, the interest for me is about what I call Mediterranean biourbanism. Unfortunately, Professor Besim Hakim couldn't participate, and nor could Marwa Al-Saboni. Both of them are related to this discourse by Nur Saad, because they speak about two elements are fundamental. One is the codes, the not written urban codes that allow this kind of building in all the Mediterranean area. The other aspect is more stressed by Marwa Al-Saboni after what happened to Syria is the reaction of people to situation of distress, of urban distress, and how they try to build, and how this urban distress can affect people on the other side. I remember one thing, I will quote now an author that is not very loved by architects usually, is Christopher Alexander. Alexander was talking about slums, and he was noticing that even slums have something that is recurrent. There are some patterns, some schemes that come out all the time. They're rebuilt by people, and this happens in different parts of the world. In a way, it's what Besim Hakim brought down when talking about this urban code in the Mediterranean areas. So the kind of little rules, very simple, based on ethics, based on the way we relate to each other in different situations, in different environment, and how these produce some specific patterns that come out. And Besim formalized them in form of rules. So he found this Palestinian of the 5th century who wrote down these little manuscripts It's about how people relate to each other when building the cities that produce the civilization of the Mediterranean. It's very interesting. In a way, Nur made a work that's very similar to what Bissen was studying. And that's, to me, is very interesting. So if there are no other questions, I'm very grateful to Nur Saad, first of all, and of course to the mentors of Nur Saad, especially Professor Schwartz and Dr. Ben Arie. Thank you to all the discussants and to all of you for coming, for being here. We have another little meeting tomorrow night. We'll be limited to a little audience, but we are going ahead with other projects in the same direction. And of course, whoever of you is interested in proposing something for this meeting, going ahead in this direction, would be very, very welcome. So contact us and we'll be happy to serve as much as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nur. That was really terrific and provocative.
Great work. Great work.
Nur.
Ciao, Nur.